You both sort of hinted at grandfathering a little bit. I guess a different aspect or more practical aspect of grandfathering. Does the exact same kind of device need to be in all fleet vehicles, or can there be a vendor mix, if assuming the vendor is on the list, the approved list? And if so, does there need to be like a roster of all the different vendors that a company is using, or how are you going to be able to evaluate compliance?
Okay, Brandon, one question at a time. As far as a mixed fleet, that's perfectly acceptable. During that grandfathering period, we do expect to see some mixed fleets. It's not a very good operational practice to do so if you've got to use two different back office systems. If you slip seat, meaning one driver can be on this vehicle one day and one driver can be on this system the next day, it's going to create a little bit of a headache for you to try to electronically monitor those hours of service. Most of the providers that I have talked to, I've talked to a lot of the major ones, and out of all of the major providers, there's only one device out there right now that cannot meet the hardware specifications. So that is the only device that has been out there since the early 90s that's going to have to be sunset. So generally, most of them are saying that it's a software push. But once again, we did not say that, we didn't require a back office system as part of the ELD rule. If we did, it'd probably be another 600, pages. So, a motor carrier would like that back office system to help minimize their manual having to review hours of service, where you've got a program that can monitor this system for you. So with that said, most of these operating systems, they wouldn't talk to each other. So that's going to be an implementation problem. But as far as a roster, we do not require a roster. Once again, we're going to recognize it as an ELD if it's on the registration page, and if it is not, then we're going to hold it to the technical specifications of 395.15. But it's not required to be on there. So if it's an ELD, it's going to be on our registration list. If not, we're going to give it the opportunity to meet the 395.15. Any comment?
Well, one of the challenges in the mixed fleet is going to be keeping your data in sync between those devices, because you need not just, if you're having a driver that's using trucks with an ELD installed and other trucks with an AOBRD installed, that's going to be a challenge to bring those into sync. And making sure that when you're, if the driver gets inspected with ELD, that they still have the necessary records, even if some of those records were recorded on an AOBRD, either by a paper printout or manually entering those records into the ELD system. It becomes a much more challenging setup, definitely.
That's a really good point. And to kind of elaborate on that even more, the ELD rule did not require interoperability, meaning, her device system doesn't have to talk to his device system. So now we're looking at, two different systems. So, this industry, we couldn't function without part-time drivers. So that is something else that you got to take into consideration, because you may be using a driver that's on another system that doesn't talk to the system that you're using. We would like to see, the industry, the providers come together and try to help resolve this. But us as an agency, and of course you may want to chime in on this too, the ELD transfer is required when an ELD is required. So if a driver has been on an AOBRD, like Andrew just mentioned, they can have that printed out version. If they were, right now, we've got, logging software and applications as well, until that implementation or that compliance date. So you could have that printout as well. So the ELD data is required when the ELD, information, okay, how do I say this? The ELD data is required when the ELD was required, but if you're on the AOBRD, you can have that. If the two ELD systems do not talk, that you've been on, your driver's been on a system from another carrier, then you could have those printouts as well. But that was a good point. Thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, just to kind of add on, I think from the enforcement community standpoint, it doesn't matter if you have a different device in every single one of your vehicles, because roadside, we're just looking at the one vehicle at a time, whether it's and even on-site in a terminal inspection, as long as the device is compliant and meets the requirements, it won't matter to us one way or the other if you have mixed fleets.
If I can follow up on that, Adrian, to you directly. So does that mean that you anticipate that roadside enforcement officers are going to carry a list of all the registered vendors in their squad cars?
I think we're still trying to figure out how exactly that's going to work. I think we're going to need to see what the list of registered compliant vendors ends up looking like at the end of the day in December. I know that there's a lot of folks signing up, a lot of companies signing up, but they have to certify that they can meet all the technical standards, and some of which are not fully out yet, and so we may see some go away or some new ones pop up. That'll be part of the training that we start to work on once we've got a better scope of the picture. It's likely, yeah. I mean, we have to access a number of systems and databases and web pages during the course of an inspection now, and so adding a quick check onto FMCSA's website to make sure it's a compliant device wouldn't be another huge step for us. So how that works roadside and in terminal inspections, because it's less roadside for this particular audience, it remains to be seen, but it's something we'll figure out and address. And then the inspectors will get used to it. They start to recognize the technology, and then they'll start to know whether or not they're compliant.
Yeah, and then it will the kind of the vendor list itself will be enforced at the data transfer process. So any of the methodologies that transfer data from that ELD to the inspector are going to verify that the device is registered, because it's integral to that data transfer process. So if your device isn't registered, you won't be able to transfer data to FMCSA via the data transfer mechanisms. So that kind of presents a self-enforcing thing. You do have the situation where data transfer is not operational for some reason. And then that's where that kind of printed out list is going to come into play, because there is always the fallback option of using the printout or the display when the data transfer can't be used for some reason. So that's where that printout becomes important.